Dune Part Two. This is going to be quite a long review. I'm going to get into it in specifics later on, but to begin with, I'm just going to talk in general terms. So I've been trying to collect my thoughts on this for nearly 2 weeks. I saw the film on opening day on the first screening available in my local cinema, and I'm still thinking about it now. There's so much to talk about with this film, and the last time a film affected me like this, it was Blade Runner 2049, which was also directed by Denis Villeneuve. That was a sequel to a beloved film and one I adored, and I did not want a sequel. But when it came out, I was amazed, delighted, surprised, and utterly astonished. It added to the original, it did not detract from it, like so many reboots or poorly thought out continuations of existing franchises. Dune Part 2 is the second half of the first novel, Dune, written by Frank Herbert from 1965. Now, of course, this is the third adaptation of the novel. There was the Jodorowsky adaptation, which never actually came to be, but then was the original adaptation was done by Lynch, and then we had the sci-fi miniseries around the year 2000, where they adapted the original novel, and then they went on to do Children of Dune. To be fair, up to that point, my favourite was actually the sci-fi miniseries. They had more space, they had more time, and I think they really did the best they could with the budget that they had. Of course, if you go back 20 years and you look at the special effects and so on, they're not up to par and they might look a little wobbly. But I think the filmmakers had their heart in the right place. They took the time to stress the character moments, to really build on the character of Paul, and to show that he was a tragic figure. I think the Lynch one was just a bit too weird and wacky for me, and it just felt a little bit too Hollywood, which is strange now that we have a big budget Hollywood version, and it has become my favourite, despite the all-star cast. With the Lynch one, I was spending far too much time going, there's Kyle MacLachlan, there's Sting, there's Patrick Stewart, and so on. With this one, as good as all of these actors are, the best thing about them is that they folded into the characters, and I was no longer going, oh, there's Timothée Chalamet, oh look, there's Stellan Skarsgård. They became Paul, and they became the Baron, absolutely, in the case of Skarsgård. His performance as the Baron was magnificent, but I'll come on to that in a minute. Visually, this is one of the most stunning films I've seen in a long time, and even though I have seen it at the cinema, I now want to go back and see it in IMAX, because it is a visual spectacle, and I kind of wish I now had a giant projection screen at home, because seeing it in years to come on Blu-ray on my TV is just not going to be the same kind of experience. If in 5 years or 10 years they do bring it back to the big screen, that is where I will go and see it, and you should too if you have not already. It is visually amazing. The scale they brought to it, not just the sandworms and the cities, but everything in the film looks and feels absolutely alien and absolutely realistic. The fact that they went to various locations to make it feel real, and yes, they have used a lot of green screen technology and CGI and so on, but they spent a lot of time in actual sand dunes, in the deserts, to make it feel realistic. We know that they shot a portion of the film on various sound stages, but the attention to detail from everybody on this film is remarkable, and it shows on the screen. Sometimes when a film's budget blows up to astronomical levels, I wonder, where is the money gone? With this, not for a moment was I questioning where the money has gone. In a recent interview, the director made a comment about dialogue which was kind of taken out of perspective, and what he was actually pointing to was the fact that he is first and foremost a visual storyteller, and it absolutely shows if you look back at all of the films he has made. He has a very particular style that you get in the big budget films, the sci-fi epic blockbusters like this and Blade Runner 2049. But even if you go back and look at something like Sicario, which is a much smaller film, it's absolutely fascinating just from a visual perspective. He's an auteur of the cinema who has a unique style. You can look at it and know it's one of Villeneuve's films, just like you can say this kind of film is a Christopher Nolan film and so on. He has a unique brand, and his work is absolutely designed for the big screen. I briefly want to touch on the soundtrack by Hans Zimmer. I know some people were complaining and saying it was a bit too loud, but for me, it made the film even more immersive. It added so many layers of emotions to all of the scenes, the horror, the terror, the fear that we were seeing on the faces of the characters, the terrible moments when we realise what is about to happen. It brought so much atmosphere to the film. There are too many great performances in the film for me to talk about at length because this would end up as several hours long, so I'll keep it brief. I've not seen Timothée Chalamet in much before, and in the first film, I'll admit I was kind of lukewarm to his performance because he did seem quite childish and tame, but that was very much in keeping with the character of Paul in the first half of the book, where he is nothing more than a spoilt son of a very rich and powerful noble who is trying to learn what it means to rule, who is very intelligent, who is learning stuff from his mother, Lady Jessica. But it isn't until we get to the second half of the film where he is taken from his comfortable life and thrown into the desert that we see what Paul can become as a character. And so we see Chalamet grow too into the role. He becomes Muad'Dib. He becomes this dangerous, powerful, religious figure that people will kill for, that millions and billions of people will die saying his name across the galaxy. And there's a terrible weight and a terrible burden and an awful knowing to the character, and Chalamet brings some of that to the screen in a very admirable fashion. I really now rate him as an actor and look forward to seeing him in challenging roles, as much fun as he probably had on something like Wonka. Having not seen the film, I've heard mixed things about it, but I'd like to see him in some really meaty roles to see what he can do after he impressed me in this. The second person I want to highlight is Stellan Skarsgård. He spent 7 hours in makeup to become Baron Harkonnen, and I don't need to say it, in general, he's a fantastic actor. He has done that. But to bring so much terror, so much horror to the character and so much menace through all of that makeup shows just how talented he is. Having watched some behind-the-scene making stuff now, he talks about this role. He'd have conversations with the director and say, less is more in case of what he says. And it is true, because he's such a disturbing visual presence. He is gross and overweight, but there's this terrible, menacing power to him. And Skarsgård's performance absolutely highlights this and makes you feel scared. The other one I wanted to raise is Javier Bardem, who plays Stilgar. When we first meet him in the first film, we understand that he is a leader, but we don't really know much about him. He's someone that's dangerous, that's someone that's powerful in terms of the Fremen, but he's willing to talk to them. But he doesn't believe when the Atreides arrive that it will be anything different from what they've had before with the Harkonnens. He doesn't trust them, he doesn't like them, and he has no respect for them, really. But over the course of the film, the two parts of this film, we see Javier Bardem's belief grow. He sees the prophecies coming true. We see that he is a true believer. And the expressions on his face, the performance that he brings to the role of Stilgar is remarkable. He sees his God coming to be, this long foretold person who's going to change the fate of his world, the fate of his people, and take them to the stars. His absolute belief plays out so well across his features that even when he's not speaking, you can see that he adores and reveres Paul Muad'Dib Atreides. I know that some people have had issues with the changes that they've made to the book, which I won't spoil here, but I was okay with them, and Dune is my favourite science fiction novel of all time. I have all of the fancy versions of it. I have the Folio Society edition with the paintings that they had commissioned for it. So I'm very invested in this as a fan. I understand why they made the changes that they did, and even though I may not have done them myself, I can respect them, and I think it worked within the scope of the story. Realistically, I would like to have seen them do this as a 10-part TV spectacle like they've been doing with Shogun. But given the budget they'd need for that, I don't think it would have worked. And also, seeing it on a small screen would not have brought the same kind of spectacle to the film. So I'm willing to say that sacrificing some of the story elements in order to fully immerse myself in the visual spectacle of it on a big screen was worth it. I don't actually have anything to complain about with this film. It is part 2 of the first book, and already Villeneuve has said that he is working on the 3rd script, which would be for the 2nd book, Dune Messiah. And in years to come, I think this will be the new trilogy that people will look back on, like the original Star Wars trilogy, like Lord of the Rings. And in 20 years' time, this might be the new trilogy that they look back on as the most epic sci-fi fantasy that they've had until something new comes along. This film is also, I think, a bit of a wake-up call for Hollywood, because they've seen over the last 15 years the decline in cinema. You have the large, big-budget films that you get with mostly superhero films, and I have enjoyed them, but they have declined in quality. Then you get the really small-budget films, which are now going to the streaming platforms. This kind of film shows you that if you have intelligent storytelling, you have the right sound, you have the right actors, and you have the right director, you can create something that's amazing and, more importantly to them, makes them a lot of money at the box office, but it has to be the right people. So my hope is this will light a fire under the arses of some people in Hollywood, and they will actually go out and make good films again. With all of that being said, I'm obviously going to give Dune Part 2 5 out of 5 bags and say that it's amazing. Go and see it.